A Texas mother was handcuffed in front of her two small children, driven to a police station, and locked alone in a cell. Her crime, not wearing a seatbelt. Under Texas law, that was a misdemeanor punishable by a fine, $25 at the least, $50 at the most. Jail was never on the table, not one day of it. Her name was Gail Atwater, and the year was 1997. The Supreme Court called what happened to her a pointless indignity, and then held that it was constitutional. Both of those are in the same opinion. March, Lago Vista, Texas, a small town on a lake outside Austin. In the front seat of Gail Atwater's pickup truck were her 3-year-old son and her 5-year-old daughter. None of the three of them was wearing a seatbelt. She has never disputed that. A Lago Vista officer named Bart Turek saw the violations and pulled her over. Nobody disputes that part. What comes next is from Atwater's complaint. The court never decided whether it was true. It assumed it was because of the stage the case had reached. He walked up to the truck and yelled something to the effect of, "We've met before," and "You're going to jail." "We've met before." That line has a history, and it is buried in a footnote. Turek had pulled her over once before for what he thought was a seatbelt violation. He was wrong. Her son was sitting up on the armrest, but the boy was belted in. Turek gave her a verbal warning and let her drive away. So, the first time, he was mistaken. This time, he was right. And this time, he was not writing a warning. He called for backup and asked for her license and proof of insurance. She had neither. Her purse had been stolen the day before. Turek's answer, according to the complaint, he had heard that story 200 times. Her children were sitting in the truck listening to all of it. The complaint describes them as frightened, upset, and crying. Atwater asked if she could take them to a friend's house nearby. Turek told her, "You're not going anywhere." Here, the two opinions tell the next 30 seconds differently. The majority says only that a friend of Atwater's arrived and took the children. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor disagreed and wrote a dissent. The opinion losing justice files to explain why. In her account of the record, Turek refused and said he would take the children into custody as well. In her telling, neighborhood kids who had watched the scene ran and fetched one of Atwater's friends. That, she wrote, is what kept the two children from being taken too. That is her account of the record, not a finding by the court. With the children gone, Turek handcuffed her, hands behind her back, and put her in the patrol car. And O'Connor notes one more detail from that record. On the drive to the station, Turek did not secure Atwater in a seatbelt. At the station, she was made to remove her shoes, her jewelry, and her eyeglasses, and empty her pockets. Officers took her mugshot, then put her alone in a cell for about an hour. She was released on $310 bond, and when she got back to where she had been stopped, this again from O'Connor's dissent, her truck had been towed. She was charged with 4 things: no seatbelt, children not secured, no license, no proof of insurance. The last 2 were dropped. She pleaded no contest, not admitting guilt, but not fighting the charge, and paid a $50 fine, the maximum. Which raises the obvious question: if $50 is the ceiling, how is the handcuffs part legal at all? Because Texas law said so, and it said so twice. And a separate statute expressly authorized any peace officer to arrest, without a warrant, anyone found violating those seatbelt laws. The same law also let him hand out a citation instead, a ticket. Texas did not tell him which to reach for. He could write her a ticket. He could also take her to jail. He chose. Gail Atwater and her husband, Michael Haas, sued the officer, the city of Lago Vista, and the chief of police. The claim was the Fourth Amendment, the right to be free from unreasonable seizures, and an arrest is a seizure. She lost, and lost again, on appeal. In December of 2000, the Supreme Court heard the case. Now, here is the part most retellings of this case get wrong. Atwater was not asking the court to rule that seatbelt arrests are illegal. She wanted something narrower, and it turns on a phrase you will hear a lot from here: probable cause. Enough for an officer to reasonably believe you committed a crime, not proof, a reasonable basis. Her rule: no full arrest, even with probable cause, when the crime could never carry jail time and there is no real need to detain you. In 3 words, write the ticket. Her first argument was history. When the court reads the Fourth Amendment, it looks at what the common law protected back when it was written. The judge made rules England built over centuries, which America inherited. She argued that at the founding, an officer could not arrest you for a minor offense without a warrant unless it involved violence. A seatbelt violation is not that. Justice David Souter, writing for the court, called her historical argument his words, by no means insubstantial. Then he took it apart. He found no such rule. He found a disagreement, and a long list of English statutes authorizing warrantless arrest for small non-violent things, night walkers, unlawful games like dice and cards, cursing, blocking a street with a cart. So, history did not hand her the rule she needed, which left her second argument, where the opinion does something you almost never see. It agrees with her, about her. Souter wrote that if the court were deriving a rule exclusively to address the uncontested facts of this case, Atwater might well prevail. She was, in his description, a known and established resident of Lago Vista, with no place to hide and no incentive to flee. Common sense, he said, was that she would almost certainly have buckled up as a condition of driving off with a citation. And then comes the sentence this whole case turns on. It is in the majority opinion, not the dissent. In her case, the physical incidents of arrest were merely gratuitous humiliations imposed by a police officer who was, at best, exercising extremely poor judgment. That is the Supreme Court describing the officer who arrested her, in the opinion ruling in his favor. Her claim to live free of pointless indignity and confinement, Souter went on, clearly outweighed anything the city could raise against it, specific to her case. And then he announced the rule. If an officer has probable cause to believe that an individual has committed even a very minor criminal offense in his presence, he may, without violating the Fourth Amendment, arrest the offender. Gail Atwater lost, 5-4. That is the floor the Constitution sets. Whether your own state allows, this is a separate question, and we will come back to it. So, how do you write both of those things in one opinion? The court's answer had almost nothing to do with her. A constitutional rule is not a verdict on one traffic stop. It is an instruction every officer in America has to apply, at the roadside, in seconds, with no lawyer beside him. The Fourth Amendment, Souter wrote, often has to be applied on the spur, and in the heat of the moment. A standard has to be clear and simple enough to be used there. Now put Atwater's rule in that officer's hands. Standing at her truck window, could he know that a seatbelt violation is the fine-only kind, and driving on a suspended license is not? That is not visible from outside a car. And her fallback, that an officer in doubt should simply not arrest, created its own problem. It would push police toward not arresting in exactly the situations where everyone agrees an arrest is warranted. And guardrails already exist without the Constitution. A magistrate, a judge who reviews arrests, rules on probable cause within 48 hours. States can pass their own limits. They are just not required to. One thing to be precise about, because the title makes this sound narrower than it is, the rule reaches any very minor criminal offense committed in front of the officer, fine only or not. Add it all up, Souter concluded, and the country is not confronting anything like an epidemic of unnecessary minor offense arrests. His phrase for it, a dearth of horribles demanding redress. 4 justices did not buy a word of it. The court, O'Connor wrote, recognizes that the arrest of Gail Atwater was a pointless indignity that served no discernible state interest, and yet holds that her arrest was constitutionally permissible. Her argument is proportionality, justifying a full arrest by the same quantum of evidence that justifies a traffic stop, even though the offender cannot ultimately be imprisoned, defies any sense of proportionality. Her proposed rule was not radical. Issue the citation unless the officer can point to specific facts justifying more. And she spelled out what an arrest actually unlocks. An arrest permits a full search of your person. In a car, it permits a search of the passenger compartment, including a purse or a package on the seat. The car can be impounded and its contents inventoried, and you can be held 48 hours before a magistrate looks at any of it. Giving officers what she called constitutional carte blanche is irreconcilable, she wrote, with the Fourth Amendment's command that seizures be reasonable. Such unbounded discretion carries with it grave potential for abuse. And she pointed to the debate over racial profiling to argue that a minor traffic infraction may often serve as an excuse to stop and harass an individual. Souter answered in a footnote. Her own words, he noted, were may and potentially, and nowhere was there any indication the potential for abuse had ripened into reality. Her closing: the court cloaks the pointless indignity that Gail Atwater suffered with a mantle of reasonableness. And then 4 words: I respectfully dissent. Souter made a prediction in that opinion. O'Connor made the opposite one. At oral argument, a justice asked how bad the problem really was. Atwater's lawyer had one example: a newspaper account of a girl taken into custody for eating French fries in a D.C. subway station. Souter put it in a footnote, noting the transit police had already revised that zero-tolerance policy to hand out citations instead. He treated that as the system fixing itself, without the Fourth Amendment. 3.5 years later, a challenge to that same policy reached a federal appeals court in Washington. A 12-year-old named Anshka Hedgepeth, arrested in October of 2000 for eating a single French fry in a metro station, searched, handcuffed, and held until her mother came. Whether she is the girl in that footnote has never been confirmed, and I am not going to claim it. What the appeals court did say is that Souter's footnote was pointing at the policy change made in her case. The judge who wrote that opinion opened it this way: no one is very happy about the events that led to this litigation. Then he upheld the arrest and quoted the rule from Atwater to do it. His name was John Roberts. The next year, he became Chief Justice of the United States. The court never said Officer Turek was right. It said the Constitution does not decide it. Your state legislature does. Some states have taken that invitation and limited these arrests. Others have not. So the honest answer to the question in the title depends on which state line you are standing behind. As for Gail Atwater, the record goes quiet. There is no sourced account of what became of her, and I will not invent one. What she left behind is the rule. She was pulled over for something that could cost her $50, and she went to jail for it. The Supreme Court agreed that it was ugly, and held that it was legal. Both halves of that are the law.